Pleasure to moderate this session themed Future of Indian Deep Tech and host some really great leaders, some practitioners of deep tech and the promise it holds for our country. So let me quickly introduce them. First, we have Sanjay Nath. Sanjay is co-founder. He doesn't need an introduction, but for those of you who have not met him, he's the co-founder and managing partner at Blume Ventures, where he oversees broad B2B tech product space. He also manages investment and ecosystem partnerships at Blume. So welcome, Sanjay.
Thank you, Atul. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Next up, we have Shailesh Kumar. Again, Shailesh is a very well-known face in our industry. He's the chief data scientist at the Center of Excellence in AI/ML at Reliance Jio. And prior to Reliance, he's worked as a distinguished scientist at Ola Cab and has been a co-founder of a startup and so on and so forth. And a very well-known and a very great supporter of AI for India. Welcome, Shailesh.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey. So next up, we have, last but not least, we have Derick Jose. Derick is the co-founder of a very successful startup, Flutura, that focuses on machine-to-machine, big data analytics, IIoT space, and much more. And I'm sure he'll tell us more about that. So welcome, Derick. We're just trying to beam him up. So while we are waiting, are we having Derick join us?
Yeah, so Atul, we're just working towards getting Derick back.
Okay, all right. So why don't we, while Derick joins us, I think we can get started. So gentlemen, let's make this fun and interactive. So Shailesh, let me start with you. As I mentioned, you've been a big champion of this thing called India AI or AI for India. And over the years, I've heard you talk a lot about that. So, where do you think we are today when we benchmark ourselves globally, both in terms of, product providers, including startups, and on the other side, the consumers of all of that, right? Businesses such as Reliance and, generally, corporates and enterprises, right? And what will it take to unlock more adoption in India, for India deep tech by businesses? And, I always like to say that Silicon Valley is as much a consumption story as it's an innovation story. So over to you, Shailesh.
Yeah, I think, obviously we have made a lot of progress in the Indian deep tech market, but we are still at least, I would say, 10 years behind our Western and the Chinese counterparts in terms of adoption and scale. And I think one of the things we need to do to get there is to start looking at Indian use cases differently than just copying the Western use cases, right? And that is one of the themes that I hope a lot of startups I'm seeing now are very focused on Indian use cases in terms of, agriculture focus in the Indian context, or healthcare focus in the Indian context, or education focus in the Indian context. So I think adapting the great technologies in the Indian context is one of the big themes that will take, technology and product adoption, because we are, like I keep saying, AI will help India, but India will help AI a lot more. So I think there's a nice synergy between technology and the market that India is. And I think whoever is going to have a keen eye on how to mix and match these two, supply and demand, will kind of take us forward. Okay,
well said. So Sanjay, let's move to you next. I know you've been very deeply involved with the ecosystem, for a very long time and earlier in the US. From your perspective, what specialized support will the India deep tech ecosystem specifically need from the investors, from people like yourselves too? And I know you're doing a lot already, as a venture capital firm, but to really grow this piece significantly, and how do we enable that? Any thoughts?
Sure. And welcome, Derick. Derick has also joined us. Atul, it's a great question, right? If I'm looking at my seasoned colleagues like Derick and Shailesh here. If you look at, B2B has largely been more enterprise software in India, right? I think we've got some wonderful deep tech innovation. I mean, if you look at space tech, right, we've got Pixel and the other great space tech startups. But I think one thing that has been a gap, and it's getting closely filled now, is that if you look at the value chain of deep tech, you've got some fantastic universities, I think the best in the world. But I think that value chain has been broken a bit, right? If you look at right from a Reliance to a university, it's not like we look at these coming out. I think Poedi and the others doing fantastic work at IIT Bombay and the others. And then we see somehow we get to look at it, unlike, let's say, a Stanford or a place where Stanford would take a stake in these companies. Of course, IITs also do. But I think now the ecosystem has started coming together and creating this quote-unquote roundtable, right? We've taken an initiative. Arpit from our team has taken an initiative called the India DeepTech Roundtable, which is really, can you pull all of these key stakeholders together? Universities, academicians. Otherwise, you have fantastic professors who are doing R&D, and then nobody funds them, and suddenly a VC will look at them after 3-4 years. So I think that value chain has to be integrated, much more tightly, and it is happening. I think what we need is you need successful role models and examples. I think Derick is a great example of that. And then you have when Reliance starts investing and acquiring some of these companies, then you see a full life cycle. The reason the Valley is successful is because that whole value chain is very interlinked, right? Everybody's involved. And on the consumer side, it's very strong. Again, Reliance is the forefront of it. So when I think the specialized support can be, mentoring from VCs and experienced operators and scientists. And then also corporates. I think corporates have a very important role to play on this. If corporates can come and partner with VCs and startups and universities and say, these are our strategic areas of interest. I'm sure, Shailesh will talk more about it. And then how does innovation fit within that? So I think the long answer to the question is that I think we need to integrate this value chain of DeepTech more strongly, and I think that's happening. It's been a sea change from 10-15 years ago.
Yeah, thank you, Sanjay. That's a good summary. And I'm going to come back to two of the things you spoke about the corporate adoption, secondly, the whole research and academia. But before that, Sanjay, again, to double click on, investors specifically, right? And the need for patient capital sitting out of India and, placing long-term bets. Any thoughts on how we, balance that more here in India?
I'll step back a bit and, be quite frank and candid, right? I think most investors, if they don't understand an area or something, they don't invest, right? So I think DeepTech has actually sort of been impacted by a bit of that, because if you look at consumer plays, right? I mean, it's really about business and about growth. And while they may not be differentiated models broadly, that has been the biggest recipient of foreign money and VC capital. So I think what we have been doing is educating ourselves. For example, we've become far more thesis-driven ourselves. Even within VCs, we are segregating the team. We're getting more specialized. I'll give you an example. When we did Grey Orange 9 years ago, they were just juniors from BITS Pilani, and we found them and we backed them. We really didn't have a thesis. Now, if you look at space tech, Arpit, Anirban have a space tech thesis. We are looking at, for example, we're looking at how the supply chain industry is going to be impacted in the air by drones, on land, let's say by robots, and in other areas. So I think we've also become more educated. I think those are positive changes. And we need far more, I think, involvement from industry practitioners, like you said, corporates. And also, I think a practical mix of university professors, but also people who, one thing I find is that we've got brilliant technologists and product specialists, but when it comes to commercialization, that's where it falls or breaks.
Yeah.
So I think we need more involvement from people from the corporate world that, all right, this is great, but how, can you convert this from a cool college project to a business? And again, it comes back to that involvement, from stakeholders.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be a learning curve. We are still early. We have to, recognize that. I think that's the whole idea behind these communities, these clubs. So well said, Sanjay. And I want to come back to sort of the adoption, right? Early adopters in India. I mean, any of you have any insights in terms of one or two things that may trigger more early adopters in India? I mean, a lot of it is just awareness, right? Like Reliance, Shailesh, Reliance has done a great job. I mean, you've done a lot of M&A of deep tech companies sitting out of India, right? But I won't say that for the rest of the, the industry, right? What we call India Inc., right? Yes. Respectfully. But any thoughts there, how we can unlock that behavior?
Yeah, I think, the next generation innovation is more around integration than, just infrastructure, just intelligence, just interface. Integration is the next innovation. And I call it the age of APIs, right, as opposed to the age of products. And I think, our favorite game was Age of Empires. So this is an age of APIs. And I think if we focus on APIs, Google Maps has created APIs anybody else can use. Ola has APIs that others can use. I think API thinking has to grow, and reusability and exchange of APIs, because no single product will need one kind of APIs. It will need many kinds of APIs, and they cannot build all of them. And I think, therefore, as an ecosystem, we need to start integrating either at a NASSCOM or a NITI level or some national level into these big mega projects that the government is doing, and say, hi, I'm going to contribute these 20 APIs into the national healthcare ecosystem or education ecosystem, as opposed to saying, I'm going to build a niche product that does 5 out of the 100 things, and nobody is going to buy my product because I only do 5 out of the 100 things that a farmer needs.
Yeah.
So how do I contribute those 5 great APIs into the national ecosystem, as opposed to think about my own product, right? And product is just a proof of a concept, but really we need to integrate into the bigger ecosystem. And the next generation ecosystem products are what the future is, right? Like smart cities and bigger projects. So I think if we think like that and say, how do we contribute our APIs to the larger ecosystem from any of the deep tech areas, is where I think the next set of innovations will come from. Integration and API development.
Yeah, no, well said. So it's not about silos. It's not about one-off use cases. It's the platform economy, and it's about integrated value, right? Well said. We'll come back to the R&D piece there, but and welcome, Derick.
Thank you.
And Derick, you're actually a customer here, right? For all of us, trying to move the needle in some shape or form. So firstly, congrats on all of your success at Flutura. I believe it means butterfly in Albanian. That was very interesting. I know you started, Derick, way back in 2012, which is a very long time in the context of our ecosystem. Could you talk about what's been the formula for your success, in your space around industrial AI, analytics, Internet of Things, etc.? Is there a playbook that other entrepreneurs can learn from and replicate for their space? Because you are by understanding, you are a market leader in your space, right?
Correct. Category. Yes, that's right. Yes. So it's been a journey. So we started the company in 2012, primarily trying to impact outcomes in the energy and engineering sector. I would say we were a little too early for the market. So around after 4-5 years is where we really saw adoption. And one of my personal learnings has been, I'm a tech guy at heart, has been the importance of sales in this whole process. Sales is the lifeblood of an organization, and realize it the hard way. And I would like to touch upon 2 or 3 key learnings we learned. So the first key sales learning we learned was at Shell. Shell was creating what was called as a well pad of the future, where they got Schlumberger, they got Technip FMC, they got Emerson, hardware guys, controls guys, and they got Flutura for the AI bit. And they built an integrated platform in the Permian Basin in Texas. So for the first time, Srikanth and Krishnan went for the sales pitch. It was a total misalignment in terms of conversations, because we didn't understand the problem so intimately. So our guys were talking features in terms of AI, and they were talking outcomes. They were talking pipelines, production deferment, and it's like Kannada and Telugu guys talking to each other. But the second time they went, I think they gave us a second meeting. And by the time, Srikanth had gone into the depth of the problem of gathering systems. So I would say extreme empathy and radical simplicity. The second time, so the best way to sell AI is not to use the word AI. I think, really talk outcomes and work backwards. So that was a very key learning for us in terms of winning that iconic deal with Shell. And second learning, so if you look at this category, deep tech category, I would put them in 3 buckets. One is the B2C deep techs, B2B deep techs, and I would put the third category as industrial deep techs, primarily because there is one element of field trials, which takes about 8 months before you close the deal, right? So because of the long sales cycles and it's very relationship led, the second learning we had from a sales perspective was to ride on the shoulders of giants. So we said we need to find out partners. So we had two kinds of partners: the engineering partners, controls and automation guys, and the consulting partners, and the guys who lay out the blueprint. Our success has been that our experience has been that the consulting partner, for example, we have a great relationship with Accenture. So we got a prospect in the Asia Pac region, and we quickly worked with them, and they were able to really structure a fantastic business model around the core tech we had. So and it also gives the comfort to a large industrial player that if the startup disappears, there is a big guy providing a safety net. So it's important to have the core within to be in the belly of a large organization, and probably so these two were the key learnings: radical simplicity and empathy, and right on the shoulders of giants, at least within the industrial category.
That's amazingly simplified, Derick. You're being very humble, I know. but you touch on a very interesting thing, and we've seen this trend where founders who've been engineers have really figured out the art of sales and how to scale. It's like really scaling a technical platform, right? And that's really amazing. So I want to go back to something you mentioned, Derick, around partnerships, and this is for Shailesh and Sanjay. If you have any feedback. Early stage founders, DeepTech, right? How much should they invest in partnerships, whether it's channel partnerships, consulting? We hear of Accenture. They have a great, play around working with, early stage deep tech companies, etc. They've institutionalized it. Many of our IT services companies are doing that. But how much time should they spend looking at partnerships? I know there's no one formula. It really depends on the context and the product space. But any quick, words of wisdom?
Yeah. I'll let words of wisdom will come from my seasoned colleagues, but I'll just take a start. I'll take a start here. I think you put it beautifully when you talked about this economy is going to be about AI and API, right? In one sense. And if you think about an automobile manufacturer like our own Maruti or a General Motors, wherever, the car they make at the end of the day is the package and everything around it. But if you look at all the automotive suppliers, it's an amalgamation, right? They probably make only 20% of the total parts. So I think, when young startups approach us, very often I think one of the mistakes startups make is that they feel that they have to have all the answers themselves. For example, say, how are you going to build out the technology and the product and go to market? And you have all the answers, and they say yes. Versus somebody saying, no, this is the end vision, and we're going to have a very strong partnership approach. So it requires, I think, a change in culture and mindset. It also requires a change in culture from corporates, right? I think corporates also need to appreciate and value and partner with startups. So it's on both sides. So that's one is culture and a mindset. The second part is, 2020 has been, and Atul, you'll relate to this, has been our Y2K moment, right? The Y2K moment applied to B2B software and deep tech. And by that I mean, in good times, large corporations can get on a plane and come here and discover these platforms, develop it themselves. In this world today, partnerships are becoming even more important. I'll give an example. Derick talked about Accenture. If you look at an Accenture or a Bain or an Infosys, their clients are telling them, hey, we want to become digital. We want to move from offline online to maybe 70% online, as an example. Help us innovate. And they figure out and say, we can't do it. Can we partner with startups to do that? So it's win-win. And partnerships are, in fact, I would say 2020 was really the year of partnerships, because again, think of partnerships as APIs, right? You plug it together, and to get it, it's a human API in that sense. So it'll become even more and more important. In fact, we tell our startups that are hiring and raising funds that you hire separately from partnerships from a head of direct sales. It requires a different set. Empathy. Partnerships are about people. It's not about technology, right? So it's going to become even more and more important.
Yeah. So well said. Well said. Shailesh, let's switch gears here. You talked about AI needs India. I really love that line. I'm going to use that in the future. What are some of the deep tech problem areas? AI being one piece of it, and like you said, it's all interconnected, right? We're not looking at silos. That let's say new entrepreneurs or repeat entrepreneurs starting up around deep tech should focus on, whether it's Make in India for Bharat or Make in India made for the world. And we'll get into the global selling thing later on. Where could India lead over time potentially, for global use cases? Where could we be really world class?
Yeah, I think the diversity of the Indian ecosystem, right, in terms of customers, culture, health data across the country, the economic diversity, the educational and the language diversity, I think that is where a lot of richness that India brings to, and challenges that India brings, right? So how do we capitalize on the diversity and celebrate it is one of the big areas that I keep wondering about, right? So think about natural language processing. We have solved it only in English and Chinese, and we have 22 national languages that we have not done anything. I mean, if you look at the silos that we have, some university is good at one language, some other is good at one language, but we haven't really cracked NLP the way we have reached GPT-3 now in English, but we have not done anything. So that is the gap that I see, which is, how do we fill that kind of a gap? And, Reveries of the world and many such startups are now building. DeepTech in the Indian context is a very important area, not just for the sake of it, but for the sake of inclusion of the rest of the India in the digital economy, right? So if our farmers are not able to speak to an AI bot in their local language to solve their personalized problem of the day, then we have not solved, anything for them, right? They're going to still commit suicide. And we need to build those building blocks, and think solution thinking combined with technology thinking together, right? So solution is, we have 200 APIs to be integrated, and somebody is good at 5 of them, somebody is good at 5 of them. Who's going to integrate them together to build a product? So we need solution thinkers and technology thinkers to come together and say, hey, you cannot do without us and we cannot do without you. Let's come together as an ecosystem. And that's how, 20, 30 years ago, the if you look at the Bay Area ecosystem and the US ecosystem, right? So the Defense Department, for example, DRDOs of the US were the consumers of technology, and they said, hey, universities, we are going to fund you. And universities got their students and graduate students to, fund their research. So how the whole ecosystem came together, right? There was industrial ecosystem, academic ecosystem, and the student ecosystem came together. And I think that if we, unbreak, it is very siloed right now. And if we can do that and identify these India-centric technology challenges and solution challenges, right? Both. And see, there's a lot of innovation, for example, bringing out the cultural heritage of India into the technology, framework, or how do you do that, right? How do you do AR, VR on Taj Mahal or something, right? So there are a lot of such things that are possible, which we are not imagining. We are still trying to copy the Western use cases into the Indian context.
It's great to be part of the DeepTech confluence. DeepTech is a great platform.
Sorry.
That is AI, by the way.
Sorry, yeah. So I think, So I think that is the big opportunity in front of us. And I think, all the way from the Prime Minister to the industries, to the startups, to the colleges now, we are all geared up towards that. And I see a very bright future in how we will put it all together.
Fantastic, Shailesh. And, I just want to say that in our DeepTech Club, we have some very promising signs, 2 trends all of you talked about. One, we have multiple multilingual conversational AI companies, and there's a bunch more in the ecosystem that have solved at least 10 languages. So that's very heartening. Shailesh, you're right. Number 2, we are seeing the interest and inclination of these founders to try and work with each other and piece together a larger solution, right? So I think those trends are very... Sanjay, let me switch to you, just to carry that forward, from your lens, opportunities you're seeing for entrepreneurs, and you talked about some of the startups you work with, and what would be the top 2-3 challenges, the obvious ones we know, but something that, are really kind of showstoppers in our ecosystem today for DeepTech?
No, absolutely. A couple of that come to mind, I think, is crossing this chasm when it comes to commercialization. So a couple of thoughts, and it's wonderful to see Reliance being so active here. One of the couple of trends that have come to the challenges. I think today entrepreneurs are building global from day one, right? It's not, like we don't like to put them in buckets and say, okay, this is DeepTech for India, and then, this is our quota, and then we'll do DeepTech for the world, right? I think if your solution is interesting, they want to go global from day one. Having said that, I really like what Shailesh talked about, that Indian use cases can be very special, and we have a very big market here also. Typically, when we think of B2B, we think of only global. So I'll give an example. Like if you look at Tricog, which is a virtual cardiologist and AI platform, the use case in developing markets where you have heart disease as a real issue, they'll pay less, but it's a real it's a real issue. The healthcare, the insurance industry is not as sophisticated. Is a big opportunity, right? It's a challenge, but also an opportunity. So just India and Southeast Asia is big. So if you look at the challenge, I think it is to partner with corporates and the ecosystem in a much more not a siloed way from day one, versus saying, we'll take 2 years to do product and R&D and then go and talk to corporates, to work in a much more inclusive way. I think that will make a big difference, right? And start pilots almost from day one. I think that's one thing that startups can do. I think the second is mentoring, and mentoring is an overused word, but I think mentoring not just from a right across the chain, not just from a scientific advisor or just from a corporate or a VC, but I think people right across, right? I mean, you're coming up trying to discover this problem. Can you look at solving it from all these lenses together? I think that sometimes the startups fail, because we'll see fantastic technology and then we say, okay, great, and it's not been deployed or it's been free pilots. And I'll say this with full sense of respect. I think we have to become better at valuing startups and not get beyond the free pilots, right? So I'll tell you the number of startups that come to us and say, "Who are your customers?" Oh, we have 10 corporates, all free pilots. The reason it's great, but you want somebody to value that technology. It's important, because we just get free pilots. It just means that they're using free technology, but will somebody value and pay for it? I think that's a mindset that has to come from Indian corporates also. And I think third is this: we need more role models, right? I'll tell you the number of times we've seen people's engineering degrees. They've done some cutting edge work in clean energy, green energy, but what they're coming to us with a consumer startup, because there's no money in that sector. So I think we also have to step up as an investor and take these chances. Take risks, and that's why we are trying to sharpen our own, becoming thesis driven. We also have to educate and innovate ourselves, right? I mean, we are the business of funding innovation. We've got to innovate ourselves and take those risks and become, more educated and do that. And we need more. I think Derick is a great example. We need many more Derricks will come out, support other entrepreneurs, and it becomes a flywheel, right? That it recycles. So our business is about recycling cash, but I think more important is recycling talent. It's even more important than cash. So that's what I would say.
Well said, Sanjay. So what I got was no free POCs. Thank you for saying that. I'm going to put that down. Secondly, make longer term bets. This is from your peer community. So thank you for saying that. And
I just add, I think free POCs are fine as a start. It's absolutely fine to start with that, but it has to lead somewhere. That's all.
Yeah, with some commitment. Yes, absolutely. So fantastic. So Derick, I know you're headquartered out of US. You build your product in India, right? And what support do companies like Flutura need from the ecosystem here in India? And also any advice for entrepreneurs that are, that have got product market fit? They've done that in India. Now they're trying to go to markets like the US. Any suggestions there?
Yeah, so from our personal experience, some of the learnings and mistakes we made, I would say there are 3 things which we felt were very important where the ecosystem can really help us. The first is one of the things we were challenged with initially was handling sales blockers. So you go to a customer, you do a demo, there are 9 people who like it. There is one person who puts in a blocker, right? It could come in various shapes and forms. It could say, well, I don't see a differentiation, perception of value is low, pricing model is not right. What about security? Some hurdle is thrown at you. And frequently we found ourselves not graceful in handling it. And I think equivalent to storytelling, a lot of thrust has been given to it. I think if you're able to up the ante on our ability to handle sales blockers, that would dramatically move the needle for a lot of these tech-oriented startups. The second point is basically around, I would say, discoverability. So initially, when we went to Houston, nobody had worked with Indian startups at all, and that is one place I think the ecosystem can really help. For example, let's take two nodal examples. So, for example, if you are able to map Emily Chang of Bloomberg in San Francisco and make sure that we feed her stories and she features us, it could dramatically change the perception of the ecosystem there. Or, for example, if you really influence CB Insights to feature in more of our startups, once we pop up on CB Insights, a lot of things would get discovered. So, getting a breakthroughs with these nodal global points, I would say, is a second area where I would say the ecosystem could really help. And the third area, to go back to Sanjay's point on free POCs, we also went through a lot of that. And if we did a root cause analysis of that, when we did that in the oil and gas industry, it was primarily because we did not have a catalog of budgeted problems to solve. There were a lot of vitamins out there. Innovation, vitamins, we'll show it in a conference room, but they were not budgeted for. That's a big blind spot for the startup, which is developing technology. They don't have a line of sight into specific line items which have been allocated for the next 12 months. So if the ecosystem can say, here are a catalog of here are the top 10 budgeted problems, let's say in refinery industry, here are the top 10 budgeted problems in telecom, or process manufacturing, we can make sure that the startup is aiming the technology at the right line item so that they don't go and do innovative innovation. Because if you're aiming it at a painkiller, and if it fixes the problem, there is no way they'll stop you from paying for it. You can demand it and they'll pay for it. It is just our lack of confidence in knowing whether it's a painkiller or a vitamin.
Right. So basically, unmet problem that they're willing to pay for, and a lot of this should come from the consumers of our startups and technology. I think all of you spoke about. I always say India Inc. needs to come to a startup party, right? A lot more. So let me ask you. Strategic sectors, right? I mean, moving to more PSUs and all, like defense, railways, huge need for leapfrogging, right, in terms of technology. I mean, is that something startups should be, like space? I think, Sanjay, you spoke about space, right? And India is opening this up to the private sector now. I mean, if we look at defense, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. I think half the size of the global IT industry, right? I mean, I was seeing yesterday there are some new drones that will put all current Air Force hardware, software, to legacy, right? So should our Indian deep tech startups, should they be paying attention and trying to cater to our strategic sectors in India? Anyone?
Sure. No, I'll take a stab at it. I have a strong point on this. I think in India, if you look at it, so which are the two sectors where we spend our biggest foreign exchange? We spend it on defense, we spend it on energy. And so if you can aim our technology at reducing our foreign exchange leakage, let's say in defense or in the energy space, I think there'll be a lot of investment and willingness to pay, I would say. So those two sectors in our experience, I think should be very, very strategic to the future of the country.
Okay. Anyone else? Any quick take?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I think what is needed is, a clear articulation of the pain points, right? Which is not happening very clearly. See, as a entrepreneur, I can think of 500 things to do, but I don't know which one I should do next, right? And I think if the big institutions like the railways, the defense, and all that, they kind of articulate their problem statements well. I can only imagine, right, that you need a painkiller, but you need something else, right? So I think that dialogue is very important so that there is clarity on demand of the next set of APIs or whatever we need, right? We can read up on the news, we can read up in a conference, but a direct communication should happen that, the railway board sits with the startup ecosystem and say, these are the 200 problems we are working on. And now, we want everybody to participate in them, right? How do we integrate these two ecosystems together and not, let them work? Because then it's a hit and try, right? I may do something, somebody may like it, and there's a big if in between. But if it is clearly articulated, like an RFP, and, everybody puts their brain together, that is not happening. The second thing I think is a very important thing is the education that we do to our children today is not about innovation or it's not about problem solving. It's about taking a test. And that has also killed a lot of innovation in our budding next generation youth, right? And I think this startup mindset, this hackathon mindset should start in schools and colleges, right? And every year they should kind of come up with an app instead of clearing another exam, and how do we bridge that gap between our education and our what the country needs in the next 5 years? So I think these two areas of clear articulation of needs of now and future, not only to the startup and industrial ecosystem, but also to the education ecosystem. So even our teachers know what they are training their children for, right? Yeah. And it's definitely not just an IIT exam or a GATE exam or something, right? It is solves some problem. So I think we need a mindset shift there as well, and how we work with government, how we work with education. They are all part of the ecosystem. Yeah, we need to realize that.
Yeah, sure. So basically, a culture of experimentation, of innovation, from early on in schools and so on. So well said. And I love that idea. I think all of you are saying it. A catalog of problem statements, very well vetted by industry would be a great start. Sanjay, any quick one? I know we're running out of time.
Yeah. I'll just make just to wrap it up, make just a couple of points. First of all, Derick, you said that Flutura is a butterfly, and so he's a butterfly that's standing on the shoulders of giants. It's a wonderful metaphor, right? To think about that. To think about that metaphor for the Indian deep tech ecosystem. One thing I'll say, I'm not lamenting about, but love to see is we don't have enough women in deep tech. And I see this, and we would love to see more of that. When we look at our B2B founders relative to consumer, that is a delta. And, we are making efforts. Half our team is, diverse and women. But in deep tech, especially in STEM, I think we need to do collectively a better job. That's one. The second point, I think, just to wrap up, I think deep tech has a big advantage of using data and IP, right, which traditional B2B doesn't have. So when you look at valuations from our perspective, I think the beautiful advantage that deep tech can have is that in addition to your growth rate and in addition to your business, the tech platforms that Flutura or our own Grey Orange Robotics and Pixel are developing, those itself will be valued because they're basically building a pipeline of innovation. They're tapping into it, right? And that is the advantage that deep tech has in the hands of the right buyers or the believers. That can be, exponential, right? Which typically, I saw a great tweet that says that if you don't define your own narrative, somebody else will define it for you. And I think deep tech has the advantage of defining our own narrative.
Yeah, well said. Well, we're out of time, gentlemen, but I have one final rapid fire question for all of you. Just one line answers will do. The core of what we do is innovation, right? And I always like to say 1,000 years back, we were number one in innovation. We had 30% of the world's GDP, etc. In this decade, by the end of this decade, where could we arrive? Any quick sense there? We'll start with you, Sanjay.
No, we would. I think we are already running half of the world's top tech giants. So I think our talent is there. It'll be wonderful to see. I would say more Reliances. Reliance has shown a great thing. We would love to see more corporates join that bandwagon and becoming believers in deep tech.
Fantastic. Yeah, Shailesh.
Yeah, I think we have a huge potential, and we can leapfrog many other economies in the world very quickly. If we start thinking ecosystem, if we start thinking integration, if we start thinking, bringing consumers and producers together. And I think it's an ecosystem that will drive that. We have enough talent. We have enough problem statements to solve.
Those are very powerful words. Thank you. Derick?
I think we'll have an inflection point when the Class B towns start joining the deep tech club.
Okay.
So that'll be a huge one.
That is a very powerful statement, and marry that to diversity that Sanjay talked about. So thank you, gentlemen. We are well over time. I'm going to get into trouble, but that was very insightful, exciting to hear your thoughts about where India is headed, for building for India, building for the world. So thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Derick. Thank you, Shailesh. Back to you, Sucheta.